Welcome everyone to the 2024 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. I'm Carla España. I'm a former middle grade teacher from Chile based in New York and currently teaching in the Department of Puerto Rican and Latinx Studies at Brooklyn College at the City University of New York. Please read our anti-harassment policy in our chat box. And don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival YouTube channel. If you are a school, classroom librarian, or educator joining us, our school visit fund is back. That is so exciting. You can enter to win a free visit from a Latinx author or illustrator for your classroom or library. You can find the link to the entry form in the chat. Now I'd love to ask our fabulous author, Isabel Quintero, to introduce herself.
Excuse me. Good morning or afternoon, depending where you're at. I'm Isabel Quintero. I write books for young people and for children, and I am the author of Gabi, A Girl in Pieces. And I am so excited to be here. I'm here sitting in my office in Southern California in the Inland Empire, and it feels like summer outside.
Well, I was going to say, it also feels like summer in my home, even though it's fall here in New York, because I'm in a multi-generational home and my family loves having the heat on very high.
Oh.
This is why. I walked out when I saw my dad. I was like, he's like, oh, you're wearing a dress? I'm like, because it's so hot.
It's hot outside. It's hot.
Our heat is, I'm trying to, but we can't handle that battle now about the heat temperature in our home.
You just got to dress appropriately inside the home.
Any of you know, with your elderly parents or intergenerational households, you know how it is.
Yeah.
But in the spirit of Gabi, A Girl in Pieces, I wanted to start off by asking you, Isabel, if you can share maybe, because in Gabi there's poets that play a big, have a big impact in Gabi's life. So I wanted to start with, maybe you can share a poet or a singer or an artist that has been giving you life these days.
These days, what have I listen, I feel like I'm a stereotype of my age, that I'm listening to stuff when I was younger, but I've been listening to a lot of Lola Beltran, and she's Mexican ranchera singer, and I've become really, I don't want to say obsessed, but I've been gravitating a lot to looking back at ranchera singers, women ranchera singers of like my mom's time and my grandma's times, and I feel like, oh, now at this age, I understand what my mom or my grandma were feeling when they were listening to this music. And so it's really interesting. And so, yeah, I've just been listening to and being inspired by them.
I love that. I actually, the artist that I wanted to share is also a Mexican artist, because my husband surprised me yesterday with tickets to go see Natalia Lafourcade, who was live with LA Philharmonic and the Brooklyn Youth Choir in New York yesterday. So, I've been immersed in Natalia Lafourcade from Veracruz, Mexico. Music lately. I know I've been like this inner journey through that latest album. And so I've just also thinking about my own inner journey. Also could be a stereotype of my age. That introspection.
Yeah.
But thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And of course, for those of you joining us in the chat, are there any poets, artists giving you life these days? Please share that with us, because
I'd love to read that.
Growing our playlist. Why not? So let's start with for those, there's several of us who are familiar with Gabi, A Girl in Pieces, but for those who might be new, I think it's great to start thinking about your inspiration behind this book. So where did the idea for Gabi, A Girl in Pieces come from?
So I started writing Gabi probably in 2007. And at that time, I was 25 and I had just failed as a high school English teacher. And like my merit, like I realized that, oh, maybe I shouldn't have gotten married. Like this was not the best choice. And so a lot of things that I had plans for were like I it was just gone. Those plans were gone, and I didn't necessarily have a plan B
Mm-hmm.
or know how to, in that moment of like despair, create a plan B. And I've
Mm-hmm.
always been writing, and I always had written poetry since high school. And in college, I started writing more, and I started writing in Spanglish because I learned about Michelle Serros, and I learned about like, oh, Mexicans write books, Chicanos write books. Like this was like new to me. Um, and so I just started writing more, and I was also I had taken a young adult lit class, and I had my own like biased opinion about young adult lit at that time,
Mm-hmm.
because really all I had read was Twilight, and um, I was reading it because my nieces were reading them, and so um, if you love Twilight, awesome. Like no judgment. um, but I was like, okay, like either sparkly vampires, like I don't, that's not my jam.
Yeah.
And then I read Fat Kid Rules the World by K.L. Going, and I was like, oh man,
Mm-hmm.
this is different.
Mm-hmm.
And I read Crash Room Love, and then I was introduced to Ellen Hopkins, and I just began. So all of this is happening at the same time, and I'm realizing like I'm starting to write poetry about what I'm feeling. And
Yeah.
then I started writing a novel in verse because Gabi initially was a novel in verse.
What?
Like I wrote the whole thing. So I have a draft of Gabi in Pieces as a novel in verse. Um, but didn't have that much humor. It was like much sadder story.
Mm.
And um, then and I started writing it because I asked myself, how did I get here?
Mm-hmm.
How did I get here to this place of not having a plan? I was so like plan focused, and everything that I had planned kind of just went out the window, and I was feeling lost. And I started thinking about my childhood and about how much really having a parent who struggled with addiction
Mm-hmm.
like impacted my ability to make choices, to interact with people, to have my voice heard, and in addition to growing up in a house and in a culture where women are expected to behave a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where you go to a birthday party and it's women in the kitchen and men outside drinking, right? And usually they didn't mix. And so it was it that's where it came from all of that, and realizing that I had been wasting my time, um starting to feel bad about my body,
Mm-hmm.
and just feeling like I couldn't go to the beach, I couldn't go do this,
Mm-hmm.
and just thinking like, what if instead of feeling that way, what if I had been brave? What if I had been able to speak my mind in high school?
Yeah.
What if I wasn't embarrassed or shy around boys, and
Yeah.
I had the self-esteem to talk to people I had a crush on? And so
Yeah.
yeah, that's where Gabi came from.
And I love that question. I think it's a great one for all of us, whether we're thinking about in the classroom or we're thinking about our own writing, is the how did I get here? It's such a great, prompt to think of, not just
Hmm.
maybe for those of us who've had to physical migration and have to move, but how did I get here with this internal turmoil or my ideas about things, which we'll get into
Hmm.
a little bit with craft in a bit.
Yeah.
Um, and again, for those of you watching, if you are joining us from a high school or you have students who are also reading Gabi Girl in Pieces, or it's been in your book clubs, please let us know in the chat. That's really helpful. It's been 10 years and this book continues to be so powerful. I know personally for me, it's been a healing journey to see this book. And so hearing from you, Isabel, it's just wonderful because it's giving us all the, the validation that so many of us
Oh,
need.
thank
Um, and so, can you tell us now? So, you have this idea. What was this writing journey like? So, you can walk us through a bit of where did you write? So, you said it started in 2007. It started as a novel in verse, and then
you.
you
Hmm.
changed it. How did you feel as you wrote it? How long did it take? I know that's usually what the questions we get asked when we're working on books.
Yeah. So it took, like I said, I started writing in 2007, and it published in 2014, right? So it was 7 years of writing. I started at that time, I was a substitute. Let's see, I was a substitute teacher. I was working at Starbucks, and I was working at Borders, and going. I was in the master's program, right? So I was working constantly, and I would write when I would get a chance. I would write at home. But then in the following year, I got hired at an elementary school library in Rialto. And so that was like a dream because I love being around the kids. It's the great part of education where you just have to deal with kids, but not with parents that much, right? So like parents, I'm a parent, but also I have, I found myself emailing my son's teacher, and I was like, oh no, I'm that parent. uh, um, but you got to, and I got to be around stories, and there was also um, there was some downtime. So thank you, Rialto Unified School District, for I paid. Like I worked on my book there, and then I would stay after work, and I would just work late there because it was where I had space and time. And then I started going to a creative writing group, Poetry IE. It was my first creative writing group I'd ever gone to, and they were super supportive. It was like everything happened at this wonderful time because the group, no, it was not competitive. There was no haters. It was supportive. It's like someone got a poem published, then we were all like, woo. It was like we all got a poem published because we're all just, every week we wrote new material. Every week we met. And so I had to be producing poetry every week, which meant that I was also reading poetry constantly, and I was in school. So it was I was constantly writing. And then I finished the draft, and I had some friends look at the whole draft, and they gave me notes, and then I sent it out, and then I got rejected in multiple places. And then there was one agent who said, I like this story, and if you ever switch it to prose, I would love to have the exclusive opportunity to look at it. And so I thought, maybe that's the problem, that it's not in prose. And so then I started working out how I would write it in prose. But it just didn't seem right writing it in traditional prose, chapter 1, chapter 2. And I couldn't get her voice. And I was reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And the first book, I just couldn't stop laughing. I was reading it in the library after school, and there were parents in their PTA meeting, and I'm cracking up at my desk, and they're looking at me. I'm like, this book is just so funny. And I thought, what if I wrote Gabi as a diary? What if I wrote it as a diary? And I started writing it as a diary, and like the voice came out, like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be. And it gives readers also a sense of like what is going on in her head. Like, it's unfiltered, right? She's not trying to make it nice for other people, because this is, no one's supposed to read this, so it's your thoughts. And so I thought this is a good way to be able to get at the core of those uncomfortable and shameful feelings that we often get as teenagers or as humans, that we all have, or many of us have, but just don't know how to talk about. And so it worked. And I sent it to Cinco Puntos. I called at that time. You would call, because most publishers, right, you send a query letter if it's a publisher or your agent submits it for you. But I didn't have an agent because, remember, everyone rejected it. And so I called Cinco Puntos, and you had to pitch it to Lee on the phone. You used to have to pitch your book on the spot, and she would tell you whether to send the 10 pages or not. And I had done that a few times before, and they didn't like the other stuff that I sent, but this they did like. And I remember it was in August August or July of 2013, and the kids weren't in school, and I was sitting at my desk, um, working on getting the books ready for the school year, and I get an email from Lee Bird and Bobby Bird, and there's Bobby saying how much he likes the book, and I had already sent him all the pages. And I kept telling myself, okay, because I'm also very Mexican about things. Like, okay, they want it. Doesn't mean that they are going to want it. Okay, Isabel, don't get excited.
Mhm.
And so I try not to get excited. But that day when I was sitting at my desk and they said, we'd like to offer you a contract for the book, I just lost it. I was just so excited. I remember going into the office, speaking to the secretary, who I was like, oh my gosh, it happened. She just jumped out of her desk and was jumping up and down for me. And she was like, what happened? Why are we excited? And I told her, she was like, oh my gosh. And it was, oh my gosh, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. It was just such a great feeling,
Mm.
right? A great feeling. But I will be honest, right? Because I know there's probably maybe writers listening or who will be listening later or watching. Like, I didn't have an agent. And
Mm.
so, I didn't get an advance for Gabi, right? There
Mm.
was no advance because it was a small independent publisher. But what I did get was 50-50 royalties,
Mm.
right? So, which compares to what you traditionally get, which is like 6%, right?
Mm.
So, I looked over the contract and I looked over the contract and then I signed, and um, yeah, it's been a journey, and working with Lee was great. And yeah, so I hope that answers it. But
Yeah,
it took 7 years, and it was just um, so surreal. Like I was telling you before, we started. Just this is a weird thing to be
talking about.
talking about me, yeah, and my work. So
But it's such
yeah,
a, like Cynthia said, it's and we're gonna get into some of the examples. It's so beautiful to see that voice develop, and I think it's helpful to hear this story for those of us who have ideas, for those of us who maybe have a young adult novel that we're writing it in verse and it might be turned into prose or we're going back and forth. I'm one of them. So I'm
do
like,
it,
chapter
do
3
it both,
in
do
verse.
it both.
So that's so helpful to hear about that, and the reality of rejection and the reality of the writing process, that it takes different drafts and feedback and community, like you having that, what was it, the creative writing group,
Oh,
how
that's
important that
huge.
is.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that you had those people in your life support you, right, from the publisher to the people in your writing group.
Hmm.
So let's because you mentioned the journal entries, can I just
Hmm.
say that I thought, for especially for the teachers and with us now and in the future, how beautiful it is that we see, not only like Cynthia said, that the voice develops, but it's such a beautiful mentor text for students to keep their own journal. Because I'm thinking, whatever grade you read this in high school,
Hmm.
a lot of changes are happening at this
Yes.
time period in
Yes.
their life. And how beautiful would it be to keep your journal on the side as you read Gabby's journal here, and
Mm.
and to think about the issues that Gabby's bringing up and thinking about the issues in our own lives. So let's get into it. Let's
Yes. Let's do
look.
it.
Um, so some themes, I think we're going to put on some quotes up here on the screen so we can look at. I think one really powerful theme is about her own journey, thinking about the way that Gabby was taught about her body and about kind of her sexual education growing up as a teenager. And so I thought you did that really beautifully just from the first page. I
Oh,
think from the
thank you.
first entry, that I'm so grateful when publishers and other people like share that first entry on a website, because I'm like, yes, read that first entry, you're hooked. I want to read the rest of the book. So yeah, why don't we take a look at that first? The July 24th is the first entry. And Isabel, would you mind reading us that first
Of course.
entry?
My mother named me Gabriela after my grandmother, who coincidentally didn't want to meet me when I was born because my mother was not married and was therefore living in sin. My mom told me the story many, many times of how when she confessed to my grandmother that she was pregnant with me, her mother beat her.
Mm.
Beat her. She was 25. That story forms the basis of my sexual education.
Oof. Okay, I need. Oh, we all had that collective breath after that one, especially even if we've read it multiple times or this is the first time. We all need that. Tell us about this first page. Like, how did you? What?
Well,
Why? So I feel like she says it like it is, both Gabi and you through Gabi. So yeah, tell us how you got to this.
yeah, the thing with Gabby is that she does, it is because the book, I've taken a lot from my own experiences in my own life, you know, so it's semi autobiographical, but it's not an autobiography and not a memoir. And I make sure like to tell people that because like I over the years I've been called Gabby many times, you know, um, and which is both like I'm flattered that you really like believed my character so well that like I feel like I did a good job, right? That I created like this real character that people really believe in. But she is a work of fiction, even though a lot of them, you know, she may sound like me as a teenager, um, and like a lot of girls that I grew up with, like a lot of people. Um, but so I had mentioned to you that I'd had the Band Together anthology, right? Um, that I am a part of that Ashley Hope Perez has put together. And can I read the very first paragraph of, well, it's not the very first paragraph, but it's section 9. And so what I did was I took that um, first entry. And so my mother named me Isabel Sara after both of my abuelitas, even though her mother was angry that she was pregnant and believed she was living in sin. She was 25 years old and had only a few years before traveled from the middle of Mexico to the US alone and afraid. And so it, you know, my mom did tell me this story. My grandmother was super angry because she was not married, you know, and she was this um, adult, right? She had come from Mexico on her own,
Mm,
right? Um, she was undocumented and she worked, you know, cleaning houses. She worked, when I was born, she was working in a convalescent home kitchen, right? And she worked super long hours, sometimes double shifts. Sometimes she left me overnight at my babysitters, who I started calling abuelitos because um, I was there all of the time, right? And my dad drank a lot. My dad was an alcoholic and he's struggled with addiction my whole life. And so um, those, you know, those stories inform a lot of the book, right? Those stories inform a lot of the book. And just, I think now, if I had written the book now, it would have been very different than when I wrote it, you know, starting it in my mid 20s, when all of these wounds and anger was still like super duper fresh, without therapy, you know, that I was trying to figure things out. But trying to see, you know, how my mom, and not just my mom, but so many moms around me, how they have these expectations for their daughters,
mm,
even though they themselves had not met those expectations, right? They had not met those expectations, and I felt like in some way they're like trying to save us,
yeah.
right? Like, this happened to me. I don't want you. No quiero que sufras como yo,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
And so I don't want you to, um, you know, leave the house without getting married. I don't want you to get pregnant and not be married. I don't want you to, because then nobody, you know, nobody's going to want you.
mm,
Okay. Nobody's going to, that's the only thing valuable about you, and getting all these mixed messages.
mhm.
And so, yeah, that's how I entered
Yeah.
the book. Right. Um, and I do also deal with trauma, like a lot of us, with humor.
Mm,
Right.
mhm.
And sometimes it hits, and then sometimes people say, oh, that sucks, and I'm like, oh man. Okay, I won't tell that story again, you know, or I'll be careful who I tell that story to,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So um so yeah, just combining those things is how I just entered
Thank
the
you.
writing. Yeah.
I was also thinking that for our classroom work, this book helps us process a lot of the actions that our older generations or our parents might take. and then the actions that we take that might be interpreted as falling outside of the norm or what's acceptable from our loved ones,
Oh
right?
yeah.
There's that tension. There's the grandmother, there's the mother, and there's Gabi. And then in our own lives, it's like, what decisions have we made that might be different from our other generations? And I feel like this book is such a beautiful example to trace those ideas and decisions, and then have students kind of notice those patterns and ask questions like why, what is the root, right? Which is what you explained from your own family, where
Yeah.
it's coming from. And I think that's powerful, and that can be done. That's super age appropriate when we're talking about a young adult novel.
Oh,
You know,
definitely, because that's when you
secondary.
start asking and you start wondering and you start really questioning. And I think what teens, or I remember as a young person, what angers teens a lot is asking questions and not getting answers, or not getting real answers or respectful answers of their intellect, of their ability to understand things, right? So so if you ask, like, why why is it bad if I have a kid before I get married and you did it, and your mom is like, cállate la boca, right?
Mm,
Like,
we need
that's
that.
not an that's not an answer. It's like, you don't want to talk about it because it makes you uncomfortable,
Yeah. And I'm even seeing some of my friends here in the chat too. We have a lot of these conversations about like our spiritual practices, our the ways we were raised with our spiritual journey versus what we believe in now, or how we practice spirituality now, and how it's been different.
Oh
And
yeah.
for a lot of us has been through poetry that we're processing it, right? And I think that's so powerful that in this book we see that. So we're gonna get to that. Another theme I wanted you to read from the August 10th entry. There's this the way you develop not only Gabby's voice, but also the friendship between Sebastian and Gabi, and all the BFFs in that circle. It's so honest, it's so real, and I think another strong theme here is addressing homophobia, addressing toxic masculinity, and presenting, what is the dominant narrative about this, and what is the counter narrative about this, and how you decided to do that. So why don't we look at the August 10th? We're going to put it up on the screen now. Just a little excerpt.
August 10th. I was surprised that she let Sebastian stay, surprised that she actually felt bad for him. She said that even though she hoped that her own son wouldn't be gay, if he was, she would still love him.
So tell us a little bit about the development of the Sebastian character and the relationship between Sebastian and Gabi.
So Sebastian is based on a lot of my men that I know that are gay, that I either went to school with or family, and they're kind of meshed together into Sebastian. And I can tell you his name because he wrote a whole blog post when I said, when I told him I'm gonna this Sebastian, and he picked the name Sebastian. My friend Juan, he helped me pick the name, and I knew Juan since junior high, since seventh grade. And when he went to Berkeley, and when he came back, like Christmas break or something, the first time we were at Denny's eating, and he, that whole scene is how he told me he was gay, and then I told him, I know, and it just took him a while to get there, and I understand that because, like, I remember I tried to ask my mom, like, when I was in high school, like, what would you do if I like girls? If I didn't just like boys, if I like girls too. Testing her reaction, and her reaction was, yo no tengo ese problema. No, de eso no me hables, right? Like, that's not my problem. I don't need, why are you even telling me that? And then she told me to go away. And so then at that time I was like, oh, just kidding, and that was it. And in talking to my guy friends and seeing how violent, especially homophobia can be, for the whole queer community. But like, I saw it because I was more around like gay men than queer women. Seeing how they were treated by their families, or seeing how they were less men, and their parents' reactions, and it was, when my friend did tell his mom, like, it was terrible. And I remember having that conversation with my mom. And even though she had issues, she's now, her ideas about homosexuality have like changed,
Mhm.
right? Like she is realizing that um, we exist in so many different spaces.
Mhm.
Um, and that, you know, so she's more positive and more open
Mm.
about that, which I'm like really happy
Mm.
to witness. But she did. She said it would, like, I wouldn't be happy about it, but that's my son. Why would I kick out my son? Like, I would love him and I would support him,
Mm.
and he would, él le va a tener que dar cuenta a Dios. That's what she said, you know, like he would have to be the one telling God, because that's his business. But I'm gonna love him, you know. And so it's conflicting, because it's like, I love you, but at the same time there's a little bit of judgment there. And
Conditional. It's like my love is not
it's
conditional.
conditional. It's conditional judgment, right? Especially because like Catholicism is, that's what I grew up with, right? And this belief that God has this that the Christian God has this very anti gay, anti queer agenda is it's so weird, but it's bought. Like you know, people around me like really bought into it.
Yeah. I think we have a really wonderful question from Cynthia in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good time to take it now as we go through, because these are really heavy. You're talking about really heavy themes in this book, and humor. Like you have, I mean, there are times where I'm laughing and I'm just like, oh, my heart, but also like. So how did you handle writing about such deep wounds related to your own life for this fictional character?
I So obviously writing is not therapy, but it is healing, right? It is healing. And so, like, if you haven't read Gabi, I'm going to do a big spoiler right now, but it's been 10 years, so that's on you.
I was trying to make notes. I was like, I'm going to give quotes from the beginning because I don't want to quote the ends. And I was trying to be, what can I do? Author, you
so, so, so when Gabby's dad dies, right? That was a really hard scene to write. And I went back and forth on how I wanted to handle that. Did I want him to die? Did I want it to be this happy, he goes to rehab and now he's sober and things are great? Like, what did I want to happen? And when I was a teenager, and even younger, the death of my dad was on my mind constantly, even as an adult. I worry about, like, my dad thankfully is still here and he's been sober a few years. But I don't know if there is a time when I think about my dad that I don't worry about him relapsing, right? And when I was a kid, like, I remember my mom having me call hospitals because he disappeared for days. I remember falling asleep at the door waiting for my dad to get home. Just a lot of things that we were exposed to that we shouldn't have been, you know, situations we shouldn't have been put in. And so I thought about all of that, and that fear of my dad dying. I don't know if it sounds mean or not, but like, I wanted to put the reality in. Like, I wanted to make it happen. And there was a relief after writing that. Like, okay, it happened and I'm okay. Like, even if it's just on paper, like, it happened. And so that was hard. And sometimes I get emotional about that scene, you know. And I also talked to friends whose parents had passed away around that age to make sure that I caught those feelings like they should have been. And then, you know, but things about like grandparents passing away or those hard things, I think I just, like, I would cry. Like, if you're a writer who writes about your life, right? There might be a point where you cry, where you have to deal with things that you don't want to, that they're ugly. But, you know, all writers talk about like writing what you're afraid of, right? Write it. And then maybe it's not so scary after you write it down. Right. And even if you keep it, just because you write it out, like, test it out, right? Like, you write it out. And if you write it out and you still feel uncomfortable, get rid of it, you know. But it's part of, it's hard, but you just do it. You know, you just do it.
And so it's levels to this because it's you're doing that through writing, but you're also developing a character who's processing grief through writing and poetry.
Yeah.
So it's
Well, yeah, because and so I make her process it, right? So it's making me think about like how would she
Mhm.
process it, and how would it make sense to process this horrible thing,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to also show some quotes from the early journal entries about this theme that's throughout the book and on the title and the cover about, Gabby's fatness and body image journey, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how she sees herself, how others see her. Different people have different expectations and ideas on her. So why don't we take a look at some of those quotes? They're from early on, because again, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to give too much. So Isabel, if you can read, there's July 25th. Oh no, keep going. July 25th. We're gonna let's the oh wait, let's go back. Let's go back. Sorry. I went through
Okay.
so many. There were so many. I'm like, where am I gonna go? Which one am I gonna do? Oh, let's pause. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Many. Oh, okay. Let's go through. Sorry, I switched
I
the order.
have it right here.
Oh, good. Can you read it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll just read it right here. Yeah.
Sorry.
So it's um, note to self: lose some weight. It is senior year after all. And do you want me to read the other ones?
Yes. Yeah. The other three.
Okay. Uh, Not that I thought she would be checking me out a lot, because who really checks out the fat girl? And then, but my mom doesn't understand this. She never does. I don't get it. I guess it's because we have a light switch relationship. Sometimes she's wonderful, sometimes not so much. When she says, no comas tanto, you're getting fatter than a pregnant woman, she's not so wonderful. Though when she says she loves to read, she has a 3.75, mira, le dieron otro certificado, like she knew it all along, that I'm smart and not as bad as she thought, she's the best.
Mm. And I wanted to make a pause here about uh, how I know it's really often in our and we have so many teachers, who will watch this and are watching this now, and you yourself, Isabel, probably did this too. It's like when we support our writers in the classrooms, we do a lot of those like inner characteristics, external characteristics, planning charts or their webs or some kind of
Mm-hmm.
writing activities to help them develop their characters.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about how these journal entries, tracking these journal entries, whenever we see that Gabby mentions her body or how somebody else sees her, would be such a great way to elaborate on those kind of writing activities. Because
Mm-hmm.
usually those are like the starting points. You're like, all right, so what is my character going to look like? What is my
Yeah,
character to feel about the way they look like,
yeah,
especially as a teenager?
yeah.
And then these journal entries, I think tracking them across the book, or even like if you have a digital copy of the book, you can do the find the search option and look
Mm.
up these words that keep coming up.
Oh,
Or if
okay.
you have your hard copy, if you're annotating it, it's a color coding all the kind of themes that come up, I think would be so helpful. But how did you decide on this kind of journey for her about her body? And I think we'll look at the end, we'll look at the zine and the poetry, but yeah, how did you decide on that?
I think I had wished for that for me as a teenager. You know, I didn't start getting comfortable with my body until I think my 30s, which is a long time, which I don't, you know, of like a really long time, and I say like a long time wasted, you know, feeling bad about what I look like or what other people thought I looked like, or um, having this false mirror in my head, right? That I would see myself, and it wasn't really what I looked like
Mhm.
to some other people, the people that I care about, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then also, you know, that quote, you know, you're getting fatter than a pregnant woman, was like something my mom said to me when I was in fourth grade, and I put it with Gabi, you know, in high school. She doesn't remember saying that to me. You
Mm.
know, we've talked about it, and she's apologized, and we have a better relationship, but it's something that really affected me, because I know that, like, I marked that as a moment that I saw my body different.
Yeah.
Before that, I was just like a regular fourth grade kid, um, weird kid, you know, but after that I was like a weird fat kid, right? Like that just changed my perception of myself.
Mm.
And it still affects me. And so yeah, I wanted to um touch on those things that I felt like young girls young women and people of all genders really struggle with. Now that I'm older, I realize how much also men struggle with this. Just having to look a certain way, like height wise, like all of these things that sometimes we can't control and sometimes are not real measurements of our worth, right? Or the kind of respect that we deserve. And so when I started, it was healing for me too, to be able to tell, little younger Isabel, like, and the young women, like, hey, it's okay. Like, your body is your body, right? Like, your body, like nobody else's body. And so if you're, 100 pounds or 500 pounds, you deserve respect and you deserve love and you deserve, you don't deserve anything less than that because of how your body looks.
Yes. And shout out to your picture book, Mama's Panza.
Oh,
Which
thank you.
I'll later at the end too. That's also a picture of it. Because also it's a beautiful. I said that one was a healing journey for me to read. And I think I wanted to wrap up with two more craft examples, and then we'll finish up with some other questions and take questions from the chat. But like I said earlier, Gabi no tiene pelo en la lengua, tú no tienes pelo en la lengua, right? You say it like it is, Gabi says it like it is, and you're addressing all these topics. And I think some of my favorite entries, because I love list poems and I do love having students in classrooms think about these topics through lists, because it seems like more accessible than working on it in different ways. But it's the January 14th, 15th entry, the March 3rd entry. And let's see, we'll put that one up so everyone can see it.
Yeah. And so it's questions I would like to ask my mother, but am afraid to, because she will probably think I am A, bad, B, whitewashed, and or C, all of the above. Do I have to get married to be happy? If I like girls instead of boys, will you still love me? How old were you when you had sex for the first time? Do you want me to read the first of March 3rd?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Instructions for understanding what boys will be boys really means. You're wearing that little dress tonight. Remember, boys will be boys, so be careful.
And this, by the way, so those of you watching, listening, and if you haven't read this, it's long. Like, the lists are long. We just put a little extra time. So what made you decide to address these topics through these lists?
Well, there's a scene in the book where Gabi's mom, where Gabi remembers that her mom gave her a book and like put it under her pillow, like when her body started changing, right? And told her, like, no le digas a tu papá. And then that was it, right? And that, I remember my mom going to the library, and now that I think about it, right, like, my mom had to get out her discomfort. She knew that I needed better knowledge than what my grandma had given her, which was nothing. Like, when my mom tells me that she started her period, she was horrified. Like, she thought she was dying. Like, and my grandma didn't explain anything to her, just gave her what she needed, and that was it. And so she knew that I needed more explanation and better resources than what she had. But she didn't really know how to talk to me about him as openly, right? And so she did. She gave me a book. She went to the library and got the book, and then she gave it to me like that. And so there was a lot of things that I wasn't allowed to ask or talk about because, like, ¿pa qué quieres saber eso? Right? Like, that infamous response, and then just the thought that, like, if you had sex, you were, like, automatically a bad person, like a bad girl. A girl specifically, porque los hombres así son, like, which was what I always got. Los hombres así son, right? But you have to behave this way. And so then these are questions, I think, that some of them, like, I had for my own mom, right? Like she's a very independent woman and raised me to be a very independent person, but also raised me to believe that I had to be married.
Yep.
Right. So there was, like, these two things, like whoever you got to marry somebody. You can't end up alone, right? You can't end up alone because that would have been a failure, you know. Um, and so these are questions that I feel that young people too around me or that I knew like would have liked to have answers to. And
Mhm.
when I would do more visits for Gabby, I would actually take index cards and I would have um, the young people like ask questions, and I still have them. I still have them ask questions that they would ask their parents anonymously, right? And I used to post them sometimes. Like these
Mhm.
are the kind of questions that young people have,
Mhm.
and they were hard.
Mhm.
Questions. Why did you cheat on my mom?
Mhm.
Questions that they couldn't ask their parents directly because of you know adults don't like being held accountable to
Mhm.
them each other, but especially not to younger people,
Yeah.
especially not to younger people or their kids.
Mhm.
um, and so that's how those questions came along. And then for the other poem, instructions on understanding what boys really means, um, I naively thought when I was younger um, that sexual assault, that rape was this very um, rare thing that happened, right? And as I've gotten older, it's like, no, it's a very common thing that happens, right? It's a common thing that happens. And so at that time, um, I, when I was writing that part of Gabby, there was a case
Mhm.
in Steubenville, Ohio,
Mhm.
that some people may or may not remember. And in that case, it was a young high school girl who was assaulted by several boys on the football team, and they took it to another. It was an awful thing, and they recorded it. And when she reported it, everybody turned on her because the boys lost their scholarship. And it was all these poor boys. These poor boys, their lives have been ruined. Their scholarships are gone. They have, you know, I kept hearing these poor
Mhm.
boys,
Mhm.
and thinking about that, you know, boys will be boys, hearing that all the time as an excuse for laziness, and as an excuse for not being held accountable, as an excuse for not um, having to be in control of emotions like women, like girls have to be in control, right?
Mhm.
When my mom would say, you know, así son los hombres, but you have to pay attention. It's saying
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
don't have to pay attention. They don't have to be responsible, but it's on you.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about the women who had shared with me their stories of assault, thinking, situations that I had seen, like, and so that's where that
Wow.
came
No,
in.
and thank you. Thank you
Mhm.
for including that. And just for the last visual to show, um, just wanted to show the I Swear list poem. So those of you watching could see that we have, there are a lot of poems and poets referenced in the book. And so for those of you who love teaching poetry and you see like, oh, We Real Cool or Gwendolyn Brooks, like you have different references here. There's the zine that's shown as well. That's so powerful that we also see on the cover, but we see the zine in the April 7th entry. um, because we just have a few minutes left, um, we wanted to, let me see, let's see, I'm just catching up here. Oh, yes, there is this beautiful, the question from right here. Who's Anna? Oh, Anna says, hi, Isabel. I had the honor of meeting you a couple of months ago with my baby, Donna. I started writing again because of you. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Isabel. What tips do you have when you feel discouraged about your writing?
Hi, Anna. If I remember correctly, I think maybe we met at the Glen Avon library. I think that's where we met in Riverside. Um, and I think when I'm discouraged about writing, after I'm done crying, no, um, I I look at other stuff that gives like other creative things. So I'll watch movies, I'll go look at art,
Mm,
I'll read more poetry. Always helps me kick it in gear. Um, Walks in nature
mm,
always help me, or just walks. But I say walks in nature also. So when I was writing Gabby, and I was like stuck. There was a point where I was stuck that Gabby was no longer talking to me,
mm,
and I could not get past this point, and I was just like, everything I wrote was just trash. And so I was talking to my friend, and I said, I'm just stuck. And she said, why don't you talk to Gabby? And I said, what do you mean? And she's like, well, talk to her out loud.
mm.
And I said, thank you, old hippie lady. I will put that on the back burner. And I don't want to. But I started going on these walks and talking to myself out loud, and Gabby would not shut up. She
Mm,
would not shut up. And
mm.
so doing those things, and then just writing, even if it's something bad, like it doesn't have to be publishable. Everything we read, it doesn't have to be right, it has to be published, right? But I think immersing yourself in other kinds of arts always helps me, and it inspires me, or it'll remind me of an idea I had, like, oh yeah, I wanted to do that. And I
Mm.
think that's always very helpful.
Yes, thank you, Anna, for that. And thanks, Isabel,
Yes.
for sharing that. If we could show the screen with some of your other work, since Gabby, A Girl in Pieces, you've gone on to write picture books, like oh yes, also the early readers, right? You have Mama
Mm.
Spanza, you have the biography of Garcia Uribe, you have Ugly Cat and Pablo, like the early
Mhm.
readers. There's a lot. Like you've been
Mm.
writing, busy. You've been
Yes.
busy. So what has been the biggest lesson that Gabby taught you and that has impacted the rest of your work?
um I was being kind of, I told my son's dad last night, I was like, I was reading the questions to him, and I said, what I really want to say is, it's like super short and not inspirational. But what it's taught me is that people seem to like my work. And so that maybe I'm a good writer after all, and I should keep writing.
Yes.
The other thing that it's taught me is that I love stories. Um, Stories help me understand the world. Writing helps me understand the world. There's that Flannery O'Connor quote, and I always bring it up, and I always butcher it because I never have it on hand. But where she talks about, like, how do I know what I'm thinking if I don't write it down,
Mm,
right? And about organizing your thoughts and organizing what you think and seeing it on paper. And that's just the way that my brain works, right? Like
yeah.
my puppy has a motorcycle. Like I wrote that book um, thinking that I'm just writing a book about my dad and me, this memory that I have, right? And for those of you who have read My Puppy Has a Motorcycle, um, like it's the same dad from Gabby, right? Like it's the same dad.
Mm,
Um, and so I wanted to write of like happy memories, that I had with my dad. But as I was writing that book, I realized that that was also about missing the community that I had when I was a kid, about missing the neighborhood, about change, about how hard it is for kids to have something and then it goes away, right?
mm.
And so those are like, the short answer is like, oh, people think I write well, so maybe I should keep doing this, right?
Yes.
But the other part is also, um, it's taught me that there are so many ways to tell a story, that
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be like straight prose. It doesn't have to be um, like a one specific way, and that I would like to find as many ways possible to write stories, to tell a story.
And so many, I'm so grateful too that a lot of your books have been translated to Spanish. So Mi Papi Tiene una Moto, I've also read a lot and planned with in Spanish, with my Mas Panza. Like it's just, that's wonderful to have access to that.
Yeah, and they have, and My Puppy Has a Motorcycle was also translated to Korean, and there's a section of photographic that's translated to Zapotec.
What? That's
Hmm.
beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna add that to my list. Also to wrap up,
Hmm.
I wanted to ask what's coming up or what are you working on? What's next for you?
Well,
that you
let's
can
see,
share? Because I know
that I
sometimes.
can share. So
Yeah.
I just turned in a draft for a book that I can't tell you about, a picture book,
Yay!
and I'm almost done with the second one.
Is it
But
a young adult, middle grade?
it's
Like, what do you?
picture books. So Zeke and I are working on a couple other things together. So, and I love working with him, so I'm very excited. Um, I also turned in a draft for Martinez Paranormal Services, which I've been talking about for like the last few years because it was due like 2 years ago. Um, but I just been having trouble with the pandemic and learning how to be mom and taking care of my mental health and
Mm,
all of these things. And so I finally finished a draft that I was happy with because I think I've rewritten that book up too many times.
mm,
Um, and that is a middle grade series about a young girl, Penelope. She's 12 years old and her parents are paranormal researchers, and so she wants to go out on investigations with them. And her parents finally agreed to let her go. And she has these, she's really connected with the dead. Like they talk to her all the time. She can't really control it, right? She can't shut it off, but
mm,
so her parents take her out. Um, and she comes across something that's not a ghost. And so these books are about stories that my family would tell when I was younger, and that a lot of families tell. So yeah, there's like La Llorona, El Cucuy,
yeah.
which are like, Mexican, chaneques. I've been, when I learned about chaneques, like I've just been like obsessed with them. um, you know, so I'm writing about them and like about where I live, but also stories like ghost stories that are like particular to my family and to, like the dead priest my mom says she saw,
Mm,
or, el hombre en caballo that like my grandpa saw, and things like that. Um, and I thought, what if they were true, right? What if they were true? And what if there was this family that was in charge of making sure that the bad stories, that they didn't get out of control,
mm,
right? And so Penelope decides with her friends to go looking for ghosts on her own to prove to her parents that she can do this, that they don't need to take her off investigations. And she confronts a vampire witch. And
oh,
that's
wow.
and so the so it's a trilogy.
Okay.
And so I just finished the first book and I'm very excited. And then I'm also working on a young adult novel, Golden State, and which I've also am like in my third rewrite that I haven't turned in because I just can't get the voice right. But now I think I'm there, and it's about a young woman who's just graduated from high school, and she doesn't want to go to college. She wants to cook, and she wants that's what she wants to do. And her parents, of course, are like, no, like you have to go to school. And then she finds out that her dad has another family in Northern
Oh,
California, and she's had this older brother this whole time. And so her and her friend, who has just gotten released from jail, go on a road trip together to meet her brother.
I mean, Isabel Quintero, everyone. We've got picture book, middle grade series, and YA novel coming up, and we can all find news on that following you on social media or on your website. Tell us
Yes.
where, and we'll then say bye.
Yes. So follow me at Isabel in Pieces on social media. And I'm doing a giveaway right now. So please follow me. And the giveaway is for teachers. So yes, find out more details on Instagram.
Woo-hoo. Thank you so much, Isabel Quintero.
Thank you,
It's been an
Gabi.
honor just to be in conversation with you. Thanks to everyone who joined us. Thank you for attending the 2024 panel here at the conversation here at the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. And make sure you also check out Isabel Quintero's upcoming books. And for me, I'll also make sure I update all of the resources you're talking about and put them on my website, carlaespaña.com. Thank you, Latinx Kidlit Book Festival.
Thank you, everyone who showed up today. Have a good one.